Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first IDM rollout webinar. My name is Brian Alcott. I'm the managing engineer, or a managing engineer here at the office of the city engineer for the city of Houston. Appreciate you tuning in today. I'd like to set, before we get started, some general ground rules for today. We do have 115 so far people registered today from across the board, consultants, contractors, plan runners, capital projects, operations. So just a couple ground rules so this goes smoothly. Please mute all mics if they're not already muted. We'll be taking questions via the chat box that's there in front of you. So throughout the presentation, at the end of each presentation, we'll allow time for questions. So please send your questions in during the presentation. We'll be gathering those and addressing the ones that we can during that time, and hopefully providing, if we get a number of them we can't answer or don't have time to answer, we'll be providing a FAQ on the website for future use. So we have three presentations today. Again, at the end of each, we'll allow time for questions. So let's go ahead and get started. So here's today's agenda. Overview, design and construction standards website. We're going to talk about chapter 3.
Up here, there's nothing.
Chapter 9 and 13, construction specification and standard drawings. Well, so we see several, for those of you who may not know, OCE is tasked with making sure the city ordinances, design manual, and standards are carried out in the city's right-of-way. We see several hundred sets of plans a week for review. So we're in a good position to see what is being done by development, by Houston Public Works, various service lines. We're also keepers of the IDM, standard drawings, and construction specifications. So seeing so many plans puts us in a good position to keep engineering and construction standards up to date. Today, we're going to touch on major changes to the IDM and its associated documents. We will begin with an overview, discuss the city's design and construction standards website, and roll into chapter 3. After this, the city engineer, Joe Myers, will present on the changes to chapter 9 and 13, followed by Jamie Reddick's presentation on the construction specifications and standard drawings. So before we get going, again, make sure all mics are muted. And we're going to just kind of jump into an overview of the review cycle and how that has operated this last year. I do want to point out that on the construction and standards, engineering construction standards website, an executive summary has been released and is posted there that talks about some of the higher level changes that were made, not in gross detail, but to give a summary and talk about the implementation, because we do deal with development from the private side affecting the right-of-way, and capital projects and operations projects that affect the right-of-way. So it's a little bit different implementation for both. So that, again, that document can be found on the website, easy enough to find. Per current policy, each chapter in the IDM will be reviewed at least once in 5 years. The city has a review cycle that is posted, a review schedule that is posted on the website. So the associated standard drawings and construction specifications are to be reviewed in conjunction with each chapter that is reviewed. We're definitely honing in on this. And in the past, I'm not sure how thoroughly construction specs and standard drawings were reviewed, but we're certainly attacking that this year and the years moving forward. So this year was storm drainage review, which included chapters 9 and 13. I'd like to take the time to point out that, if a significant issue is identified in any of the documents, it does not need to wait years to be corrected. We will be working on addendums or errata or whatever the document vehicle needs to be to make corrections that are communicated to the city engineer and that are maybe general public safety issues. So establishing the website, the distribution that everyone here should be a part of, distribution lists, this webinar are all part of setting up effective communication to alert everyone on any changes of the city standards. So you can receive those changes at your desk while you're designing, while you're reviewing plans. So this kind of gives you this year's, past year's review cycle timeline. The timeline this year was highly reduced because of Harvey. Houston Recovers website, it's the City Redevelopment and Drainage Task Force, took some time to make immediate changes in response to Harvey. That was, as many of you are aware, that went into effect in September. During that time, the director also received a lot of comments that were unrelated to Harvey but needed to be made. The decision was made that those need to be addressed during this review cycle and put off until this took place. So once September 1st publication hit, we started the review process, which truncated and kind of shrunk our typical process. So to kind of go through the process that we went through this year, open review period, November, December, January, we fielded the comments and vetted all the comments. This year, we went through a process which we're going to follow in years to follow. We had an internal review and we had an external review. So we had internal review committee consisting of operations, capital projects, a number of folks internally that helped us come up with a draft of what we wanted this chapter to be. Once we were comfortable as an organization, as a department with this draft, we then started to conduct external meetings with Harris County Flood Control, APWA, and a number of other folks that ACEC, HCA, that give input on how this would be received by the community, the design community, the contracting community, and to maybe adjust the draft as needed so it's implementable. So we went through that review process, and you'll see that here laid out for you, and then accumulating in the week of July 1 when we posted it. So here's a list of the review members for this past review cycle. We had the office engineer, and there are the folks that were involved, with Kathleen acting as the chairperson over stormwater operations, with Tanu and Umer being heavily involved, capital projects, Kevin Hammond and Jody Craze, and wastewater operations with Mary Bach and Ragu. Because stormwater documents share a lot of the documents with wastewater is why they were heavily involved, particularly with your manholes, conflict manholes, and Joe will speak more to that in Chapter 9. So again, on the right, you will see a list of folks that were involved. And external, which was really a great collaborative effort. We met for weeks, gathering input, going through line by line. So this year we also had a number of out-of-cycle revisions. Chapter 3, Chapter 16, and we also incorporated existing supplemental specifications. So I'll talk about Chapter 3. That'll be our first presentation and why that was out of cycle. Chapter 16, Telecommunications, with the passage of a couple of recent state laws, the telecommunications work has really skyrocketed in the city. We're seeing a ton of plans in the magnitude of, I don't know, 50 to 60 a day for telecommunications. And so we had to post something to kind of make sure that everything was sort of being properly. We also incorporated existing supplemental specifications. So we went out and we identified any existing supplemental specifications that we could find. We vetted them internally to make sure that they were changes that either had not been made to the specification yet and needed to be made to the specification. So those are incorporated as well. I do want to take a minute to point out the Design and Construction Standards website. This is what we'll be using to communicate all the changes. So if you haven't already, please bookmark that. All the items discussed today can be found on the city's design and construction website. An easy way to find the website is to go to Google, type in City of Houston, design and construction standards, and it is the first link that pops up when you do that. This is what it looks like. Please keep in mind, we, the city, are currently migrating to a new site. We're working with IT to make sure that transition is seamless. There will be changes moving forward. I also want to point out that we're trying to be as clear as possible with the changes that are coming out. You will find red lines on everything that we do for this review cycle. That includes IDM, specification, and drawing red lines. So here's the link or an example of what you can find for Chapter 9. And I also want to point out on this website, we also have a number of project manual resources. You can find a template for project-specific specifications, supplemental specifications, a master unit price item list. Some of the biggest issues the city sees is with use or rather misuse of measurement payment portion of the specifications. The master unit price list posted has unique numbers per item. We ask that if you are requesting a new specification that you identify a unit price item for that specification. All this ties into having a proper functioning master unit price list. A lot of the issues that we see or claims and issues that really generate from the specification and not being clear on how whatever element that is being installed and paid for. So you'll find that direction here. We're trying to get away from, or we're asking no direction be given to a contractor in the 1110 or the 410. We're asking for specifications to be written if you want to give direction to the contractor. So again, special specification is a new term for the City of Houston, and that would be a specification that is new to your project and doesn't exist in the construction specifications as they stand now. So we're going to jump into Chapter 3 and talk about why Chapter 3 was reviewed out of cycle and where we were headed. So here you can see a page from the 1993 IDM, and it looks a lot like the 2018 page out of the IDM. There's not been a significant update to Chapter 3 in over 25 years. Part of this is due to the city over time moving away from in-house plan production. The focus becomes over time becomes more on just the paper plan deliverable from the designer. And so as an entity does that without in-house plan preparation expertise and no new CAD standard design, no new CAD standards, design consultants were creating plans with little guidance when creating a plan set. So I really push for this. My career has been 2/3 plan production at this point, 1/3 with the City of Houston. When you first come into the city, you see a lot of plan sets and you get to see a lot of the inconsistencies that are out there. The first reaction is, what is this design community doing? Then over time you realize it's not the design community, but probably the lack of direction that we have given to the design community. Every plan set that I opened that was different just led to that sort of aggravation of everything was sort of out of order, nothing was what you expected. And this was kind of the norm. It still kind of is the norm until this gets fully engaged and implemented. That your traffic control can be at the beginning, can be at the end, your tree protection could be anywhere, your survey, which is generally in front, doesn't necessarily have to be. We wanted to tackle some of these. So about a year ago, I saw an opportunity to update it, and I just jumped at the chance and initiated this, just kind of jumped in on the capital project side and then eventually coming over on the city engineers side to finish that. So here's some of the known issues. General inconsistencies between all plan sets, the ordering of sheets, symbology. Those are some of the bigger issues. The city is also requesting the CAD files as a deliverable. This is to set the stage for possible future importing of new assets into GIS. But to even think about doing this, you have to start with a basic CAD standard. You can't even begin to have the conversation. And so what's happening throughout the organization, is that the department is realizing that we need to know where our assets are. So there's been heavy effort in a number of the operations groups to identify those assets and get them into GIS. And now there's a lot of effort being done on new assets that are being created to make sure that they don't have to be manually inputted by somebody in Bob Lanier building from a hard copy. If the design community is not aware, right now in our professional services contract, we are asking as a CAD deliverable. We are also asking on the stormwater operations side, they have actually started to ask for a GIS deliverable. So they do have a standard format they want to see these items delivered in. So this is all leading to this great sort of conversation that is occurring throughout the department with different operations coming to the table, different service lines coming to the table, and us trying to figure out the best way for new projects to implement and import this data into GIS. Part of submitting CAD files, when you submit those, they need to get to the operations folks, and it's going to further push the question of, okay, what are we receiving? How do we implement this? Is it implementable? How do we bring that in? And there'll be further conversations about associating attributes with different levels, different layers for pipe size, pipe diameter, material, things like of this nature. But again, that can't really happen yet until we set a CAD standard and start benchmarking it and moving forward. Before we jump into chapter 3, I think it's important to highlight some of the tools, that are out there. That have been developed to assist in plan production. These line up with chapter 3. There's a line style file that was created and jives with chapter 3. There's also a CTB file that's been provided for plotting consistency, a plan and profile template, a standard symbol sheet that is a sheet to be included in the plan set, but it's also a DGM that's out there that has the blocks that you can just pull off and use in your plan and profiles as you develop them to kind of save time and energy and create these things. A link has also been provided to be included for the private development sets on notes, and we can talk more about the general notes on the in-house projects versus the private development notes more in a little bit. I did want to go back to this slide that was up briefly and talk about chapter 3 and how it was created, because a number of people have helped throughout this last year develop this, and I'm going to go through it kind of briefly to touch on the highlights of it, but it's not to undermine the level of effort that was really put into this. You know, we created a CAD standard. For a lot of you out in the community that have worked on design builds, that's not a lot different than if you're GEC or a program management office creating a CAD standard for that project. It has similarities, but you know, when you're creating it for an entity with so many different types of projects, it's really a lot more complex than that. So initially, you know, we go out, I've looked at TxDOT's, the county has a CAD standard that's out there. We went out and met with the airport and talked about to Vince Hamilton out there and talked to him about his CAD standards and what they're doing as far as asset management. And if you go to Seattle, Seattle's one of the more progressive cities that if you're a CAD operator, if you're a technician, is really quite great. They provide a workspace for you that it's a zip file, you unload, and boom, you can just start working. And so we went through, and you go through this period of data collecting and seeing what's out there, what's provided. So we went through that, and a lot of this is the product of pulling everything together. And so what you're going to see in chapter 3 is it should not be a whole lot different than any other standard CAD standard that you've dealt with. It just has city preferences, and it's just new to our organization because we haven't established an effective one as of yet. So in the early stages, in the beginning of this whole process, being over in capital projects, really focused on some of the basic capital projects issues that were identified across the service line. These would be cover sheet, general notes, sheet index, title block. In the past, general note sheet has been used to dump all sorts of project information. We've seen it used from everything from specification-driven items to clarification of pay items. Its current intent, really, now, if you look through all the plan sets that were out there at the time for bid, a lot of the stuff that was winding up on the capital projects general note sheet really shouldn't have been there. It's part of the reason we're providing a special specification, a template for that, to identify some contractor-driven direction that you might want to seek payment for, or maybe incidental with something else. It shouldn't just wind up randomly on a general note sheet in the hopes that somebody sees it there. So really, when it came down to it at the end of the day, third-party notes are really the only thing that should be shown on these general note sheets, the AT&T, the CenterPoint. Because at this stage, working with Phil DeWalt, reaching out to all the different third parties, making sure we have the current updated notes, making sure everything was as current as possible. And then giving direction to folks. I have a little technical disruption there. So to give direction to the folks developing those CAD sheets, to giving direction to the CAD operators and folks like that to instruct them that the other notes should not really be put on there. And you will see that in the CAD files promoting this kind of behavior and plan set creation. The sheet index was another one. Sheet index seems very straightforward. Sheets should be in a certain order, but the city has never really done that before. The city has kind of left it up to the design community. So we went through, we had a lot of conversations internally in capital projects. So what order do we want them to be, and what sheets should be in the sheet index as part of a plan set? And so that's what the sheet index does, and it gives direction to a CAD operator, a technician that shows what to do, what sheets to provide, and to the designer when you're creating a plan and profile, what sheets are you expecting, and in what order are they expected. And eventually, hopefully soon, we'll get to a world where no matter what plan set you open up the city of Houston, it all looks the same and it's all in the same format. We also adjusted the title block. So I do want to go back and touch on, one of the things that was done was abbreviations as well. The abbreviations early on was it seems like one of those things that's a very simple task to handle. But I personally pulled down 15 bid sets, put them all into Excel. I actually lobbied for some help to type all these up. And you look at the national CAD standards, there's nothing really out there specific for a municipality. And so it was a long vetting process to even come up with an abbreviations page that's posted out there now that's applicable to the City of Houston's drawings. So now those are the tools that are out there and I want to make you aware of. And I'm going to jump into highlights of Chapter 3. And again, a lot of work went into this, and we're just going to touch in the important stuff with y'all knowing that Chapter 3 is out there for you to read and understand and to use and implement. And understand with anything today that you can shoot the standards review committee an email saying, hey, we're seeing issues with this, we're seeing a broken link, we're seeing when we import this, it's not working, when we open this, it's not working. So again, just today touching on the highlights. So Chapter 3 does give direction on importing cities' standard drawings. Standard details shall be imported on sheet files. For visibility, each sheet shall have up to only 4 8.5 by 11 standard detail drawings. The current standard drawings can be found at the Houston Public Works Design and Construction Standards website. The city is still moving forward with only a PDF version of our standards available, but we want these to be easy to read when brought into CAD. You will see this later in the presentation when we talk about the new storm details that are out there now. You know, I think a lot of us are used to opening up a plan set to the standard sheet and not even looking at the standard sheet because you cannot read the standard drawings. Well, to me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We actually had a case where a private developer was trying to put standard drawings and had up to 12 on one full-size sheet. It just sort of baffled me, why even go through the exercise? So we felt it important to put this into the plans, to chapter 3, to kind of hash out exactly what was required. You'll see that later in the presentation, when Jamie gives her presentation on the standard drawings, we're redrawing, we're trying to get away from the 8.5 by 11 as we can. We're going to redraw those to put many of the standard drawing details on full-size sheets so that they can just be slid into a plan set, and you don't have to maybe not even worry about what size and squeezing a PDF into a CAD file, and kind of help with that process. We also talk about Workspace. You know, we really want, what's really going on in industry now is because the city doesn't provide a Workspace. A lot of you out there have taken your, if you do work for the county, if you do work for the DOT, if you do work for somebody else who has a CAD standard, you're essentially, you may have your different workspaces for all your different clients set up, and if we don't provide one for you, you'll take one and just try to make typically a internal PM will give you a couple PDFs to follow, or you may already have some examples to follow, and you'll do the best you can with creating your own workspace. And so everybody across the city has their own City of Houston workspace when they're producing work for us. And so we wanted to go away from that and give the guidelines that are needed to create a workspace. So what you'll see is that we talk about drawing file assembly. We'll talk about how to attach reference files to be attached in model space, drawing those in a one-to-one with pertinent annotation, text, and dimensions. Sheet files included in model space except for title block. Title block shall be attached in layout space. We also talk about paper space and designated, you know, having it designated for producing printed deliverables. So again, a lot of the things that you normally see in a CAD standard, we had a lot of conversations about how to create this workspace and preferences, and there may be some of you out there that as we go through these, we're like, well, no, I prefer to do it this way, and I prefer to do it that way. And so we've had a lot of that, and this is the result of where the city feels where we want to be and where we are comfortable as far as workspace and any other preferences you'll see. So privately funded and publicly funded general notes. So capital projects and privately funded projects have different note requirements. This is something that's often confused. The capital projects notes should be held to only third-party notes, and often there's a director to a contractor incidental items, as mentioned before, that needs to be put into the specification. And then similarly, we keep a privately funded set of notes up there. Any work that is done by a development, these are the notes we're asking that we feel are not covered because the process is a little bit different, that we're asking to put on the development notes so that when the contractor gets out there, certain things are brought to their attention. But the privately funded notes, which has in the past been brought into the public realm and put on sheets just because of that idea has not been effectively communicated, we're given direction and we're given the guidance there to do that now. So that can be found in Chapter 3. So many of you recognize the table on the left. Anybody who's done plan production for the city should recognize that since it's been up there for 25 years. So we felt it was time to retire that. So we've now provided a line style file. So the table on your right is what the LIN file has in it. It exists. Again, these are the preferences. This is what we want to see. We really wanted to distinguish. It's typically common practice in the industry that existing is lighter and proposed is bold. But that, you know, again, we see a lot of plan sets, and that some of these concepts that most everybody online here may recognize as industry norm, because of the variety of I would say designers that we have, all the way from an architectural firm trying to do civil work to the high-end civil 3D folks that are a common clientele for planner profile, you recognize that this is not commonly understood, and some of this needs to be just explicitly stated. And so that's what we've done here, and the line style, again, providing you the tool to easily implement this when you're creating your plan profiles. One of the other bigger changes that we've gone to is requesting a layer system. So Chapter 3 provides a layering guide that follows the National CAD standard. Nothing revolutionary, nothing groundbreaking, just to set the stage for future layers that might be established by the city, again, for possible implementation of bringing in assets from CAD through into GIS. So we've already gotten several questions talking about, well, what if the line that I want to create, what if the element I want to create is not covered by the National CAD standard? Because National CAD standard is a very broad standard that's used and has to be for what it is. So there is verbiage in Chapter 3 underneath in this section that gives you the latitude to create layers within a certain parameter and still hold into the CAD standard. We also provide guidance on electronic plan review. So Chapter 3 is plan production, creating your plan profiles. But if you're coming to the Houston Permitting Center, you're going to be asked to submit electronic plan reviews. We are capital projects is now, we're doing an intake capital projects, hopefully going to this soon as well. On the private side, you guys are very familiar with this. And so we needed to put something out there to talk about, to give direction on the PDF numbering and how to number your sheets. So when they do come in for review, that review goes smoothly. So you'll find direction on submitting PDFs. And another, something else to touch on is electronic plans. It's not to confuse PDF submittals with your CAD deliverable. So PDF submittals being electronic plan review through the city's permitting center for review versus your CAD deliverable if you're doing in-house work to operations or capital projects, whomever you're doing that work for. One of the other things that we realized, through the course of working in capital projects, and what I've noticed through change orders and claims and sheet revisions, is the revision process of a sheet wasn't really defined. And so the interesting thing about this when you set out on this journey is that, again, the industry understands the revision process, but there's a lot of different variations of that process. Some of the questions that you face is, if you have more than one revision, if you have 3 revisions, if you have a whole sheet revision. And when we looked at a lot of the other CAD standards that exist out there, no one had actually written this down, and nothing that we have seen actually hashed out the revision process. What do you do, and in what way do you do it? So you'll see on the sheet layout, on the sheets that provided, that we provide an area for revisions. In Chapter 3, we talk about the proper way, at least for a city project, to implement revisions. And the hope is that putting this out there helps reduce focusing really on internal issues of what we're receiving from EORs and what we're receiving from the design community when we are having a change in the plan, and how to effectively document that, be one revision after another. Also provided in chapter 3 are some example sheets. You'll see an example sheet for abbreviations, symbols. These can be found online. There's a plan and profile template, a symbol sheet with cells that can be used, as mentioned before, a capital project sheet index, various cover sheets. It's probably a good time to point out that cover sheets change. If you've been doing the work with the city, particularly over the last 2 years, you will recognize that our cover sheets have changed quite a bit, and will continue to, based on information that's brought to our attention, or for whatever the city needs or is an identified need. We will try to be more vigilant about communicating changes that are made to cover sheets, that are made to standard drawings. But these things are done so that right now on the private side, there's a push to remove or reduce a lot of, or with all plan production, reduce a lot of the title block space that's there on plan and profiles, so that there can be more real estate on that sheet for the things that a designer does need to communicate. And the conversation is currently going on about what does need to reside on a plan and profile and what does need to reside on the cover sheet. So again, you can expect to see more changes to cover sheets as we go throughout. I do want to talk about implementation, because many of you may be asking about if you're internal, I say capital improvement projects, but that could come out of capital projects or operations, and then the private sector. What is implementation? What are we going to need to do moving forward? And it's important to point out to everybody involved that we're not trying to increase costs or delay a project that is currently underway. So the requirements shall be followed for all projects start phase 2 design after July 1, 2019. But although it's not required for all the projects, it's highly recommended that all designers make an effort to incorporate the new changes into their current design to the extent that it does not increase cost or delay a project. So you can find this is the blurb that is out there in the executive summary. And if everybody does follow the same CAD standard, we're all speaking the same language, you can expect that your review does go easier, your communication does go easier. So there, you don't necessarily have to follow that with these projects, but it's, again, recommended. And then in private sector, again, projects in the public private sector realm shall comply with all project docs electronic review requirements. That portion of Chapter 3 is there, and it's something that you're already following to the most extent. And there's a few little tweaks in PDF naming convention, but that's already known to the community. So all other graphic requirements within Chapter 3 are recommended. Again, if the team of reviewers here, if your PMs within Bob Lanier building are reviewing, are speaking the same language, if we're all looking at the same thing, you can expect that communication across the board, and when you get into field to construction, to go a lot smoother. So again, certain things aren't going to say be required, but it's highly recommended. With that, I've kind of flown through this. I do want to allow time for any questions, but that is kind of an overview of Chapter 3. And again, it's an overview. I know there's some of you out there that were part of it, or anything else that why didn't he talk about the exhausting conversations we had about different text, and why aerial versus this, and why the symbols for manholes weren't talked about. But we took care of that. A lot of the issues that, I know Blackline is out there listening, the issues that didn't get captured in Chapter 3 when they came back around, because the city maybe didn't recognize the need for it at that time, we did address, and we did sit down with ACEC, and we did sit down and talk about not only the mom and pop places that were, have to do individual sheets, but also the civil 3D folks that are trying to save time with annotation and save time with symbols. So I do want to address a couple of questions, the common questions that we're kind of getting now. To start off with an easy one, the PDFs need updating, printing are not good quality. I think you will see with the stormwater ones that are out there this year, and that Jamie's going to speak on later, those should be of high quality. We recognize the 8.5 by 11s that were drawn 20 years ago by, I'm not even sure what means, do need to be retired. And so we are going to be going through this process of redrawing all of our CAD standards. The thing is, we can't do it overnight. So we are going to do that rather rapidly, but we do recognize that some of the PDFs do need updating. And then the question often comes up, hey, will the city be providing DGN files for us to use? So we're not quite there yet. I've coming from a bridge design background and a plan production background with highways and bridges, I'm very used to TxDOT and a number of other DOTs I've worked extensively with providing that. Here at the city, we're not at that level of comfort. The process is the director signs off on our PDF, and that's the PDF we want you to use. I think that conversation will be evolving and moving forward as we go through this, but right now we're focusing on providing you a PDF of our current standards that are usable. So then we get the question, will Houston Public Works only accept AutoCAD as CAD deliverables? Some of the City of Houston projects are TxDOT funded, thus MicroStation is used. So the statement that's in Chapter 3 is a statement that states that we need the deliverables. We need the deliverables delivered to us in an AutoCAD format for our own use. That's what we have the license for. That's what we need. You know, it's not to say that you have to draw that in AutoCAD. We want the deliverable to follow the CAD standards we have in an AutoCAD format. I'm not sure where the DXF extension is now in delivering those things, but at the end of the day, if it's our asset, we need to be able to use the programming that we need. So if you're delivering something to us, we're going to ask for AutoCAD deliverables. So what will the city do about protecting every engineer's electronic seal? We can talk about more at length. We can go through, we can talk about what is submitted, what needs to be on those DGNs versus perhaps the hard copies that are submitted. So questions like that I think probably do need to be vetted a little bit more. And you're going to see this conversation. This is the city saying we are asking for your CAD files and pushing the conversation of what we're going to do with those CAD files, and the issues revolve centered around that. I think more of the complicated questions that are here, I think we're going to field offline. I will say this, that any other questions that you have, so we have the Standards Review Committee email that's out there now. Send your questions, and this is going to be a general comment, and I'll take this moment to kind of harp on, if there is an existing issue, if you see something, say something, and we will act on it. It may not be right away, but it will be captured. This goes for Chapter 9, goes for the specifications. One of the most irksome things that you may hear from producing an asset standpoint is an inspector saying, or a contractor saying, the spec says this, but we don't do that. And then it begs the question, why do we have that direction? The IDM says that, but we don't do that. Then why does such a document exist? So if you hear those kinds of statements, shoot us an email. Again, we will be doing our best to create and establish and hone in the processes to capture these items. Hopefully, maybe at one point go into a ticketing sort of situation, and giving you feedback on where some of these issues are. With that, so this is a good question. One more question, and then I'll turn this over to Joe to kind of go into Chapter 9. What version of the CAD should we submit to the City of Houston? So the most current version. The city is asked that. At one point, we were having the conversations with Anthony Powell and about licensing, but our license is such that we have the current version, whatever that is, and that's how the professional services contract may be revised. And that's how the Chapter 3 is written as well. But again, we'll gather, I think, what we can do with a lot of questions and keep them coming throughout this presentation. If you have more questions on Chapter 3, throw them into the chat. We're gonna export them into a Word file. We'll work on posting an FAQ if need be. We will also, the hope is again to post a recording of this for future use, but definitely addressing the questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude Chapter 3. Turn this over to mute the mic for a minute and then turn this over to Joe to speak about Chapter 9. Thank you.